Hi, we're going to go over creating depth with color today, and this is one of my favorite classes. Creating depth with color is something that it can really enhance your images and your sessions if you know how to use it correctly. As with most artist tools, color layering can be mostly subjective. It really depends on how each person views colors and other elements in your artwork. Lighting is a huge element in this whole class. Your focus range, also what is in focus, what's out of focus, what's in the background. Those are elements that really, it's a subjective compositional situation that you have to be able to look at and see where pinpoint all of the things that you're doing right and all of the little things that you're doing wrong. But the great point here is when you take those elements away, you do have easy rules to stick to that can help provide depth by layering your different colors. In our studio, we have a pretty even lighting situation. We do create some shadows, but a lot of our color layering is more of a light to dark layers. And that's what creates a lot of depth in our studio. At this point, lighting plays a huge point in creating color layers. After all, color is just the hue that we see when light reflects off of it. And a great example of this is when you're in Photoshop and you see you've blown out the highlights and it's just big, stark white blotches on your image. It happens on noses and foreheads and chins, just places that the light caught, and it's just stark white. When something's lit too bright, we see it as white, and when something isn't lit up at all, we see it as black. Being able to control and understand the lighting in your studio will help you provide the best tools for really making color work in your sessions. And that is 100% true if your white balance is off and if your lighting is off. If your lighting looks bluish, then all of your colors are going to look more blue. So you really want to know your lighting before playing with too many colors. And part of the reason is that we're going to make shadows work for your colors. When you have soft shadows in your composition, it creates different levels in your artwork. Many times these shadows are used to help define the edge of something. One example is the baby against the posing fabric. You want those clean edges, those flat hands. That helps define the space between your baby and your background. And that little line of shadow really helps it too. It also helps define non-important things that recede in the background. Wraps that trail off the back, they're in shadow behind the baby because they're not the most important element. They're beautiful and they're great to have in your image, but the most important is always your subject. So you're going to have those in shadow while your highlighted subject comes out to the front of your image. Use these shadows by making sure you're using darker colors where shadows are lurking in your image. Light colors brighten your shadows. If you have a beautiful black or white background and then you put, you have your shadows in there and then you put in something that's even brighter than those shadows, it's going to confuse your eye on what is really coming forward against that white background, the baby and different elements, or what's going back into the background, because the shadows are going to be grays. So you want those grays to really view as grays and not be like, oh, here's another layer of white to bring that forward. Light colors brighten your shadows, so it pulls your eyes toward an unimportant space in the composition or blurs the edges between your specific parts of your image. Like I said, you can have shadows on buckets to help show that the bucket is less important because it's not front and center on everything. But if you stick something on there that just reflects, and we have this a lot in our Tubby Time sessions, we put babies in galvanized buckets for those, and the reflection off of there can be just huge and it takes your eye right to it. So make sure that you are using duller, darker colors for your shadowed areas so that it goes back into the background. It just merges nicely with the shadow and doesn't bring the shadow out to the forefront. Boost your highlights with light colors. And this is another key element that you can do very easily. You can add this to add depth to your images and enhance your highlights. Even in dark, moody images where you want your subject to be clear and obvious, but you want it to be moody and you want it to be just full of richness and layers of light and color. You can't just brighten up your image to say, oh, this is the baby and this is what looks good, because eventually you're going to blow out your highlights. There's going to be splotches of white on your canvas in Photoshop, and you're going to go, what do I do now? You know, there's these awesome depth of shadows here in the corner, but this baby's face is so bright because I want it to be in the forefront of the picture. I want it to come forward the most. Something that you can do very easily without blowing out your highlights and making it harsh and just making the whole composition hard to read is not adding more light to it, but adding a light color to it. It brightens up those small shadows that are around the baby that maybe are pulling you back into the moodier part of your image. But it brings the focus right to the front of the baby and brings out those highlights that are already on the baby in such a really great way without blowing out your image and just making it so harsh and so bright, and your dark's too dark and your light's too light. It helps even the tone between all of them. Here are some more tips. They're not always rules. It depends on each circumstance and especially the lighting that you have in your studio. Light colors come forward and dark colors recede. And that's pretty true to things. There are always exceptions to that. Bold colors and highly saturated colors usually recede. And a quick thing that we do in Photoshop whenever we have a bold color somewhere and we're going, this isn't working, we just dumb down the saturation just a little bit and the contrast, and it makes it blend right into where it should be, not into the background or into this shadowy corner that it doesn't belong in. Warm colors, when you have warm and cool colors together, warm colors come forward in those compositions. Yellows, oranges, they are naturally more bright when you think of them. But even when they're the darker colors, they still come forward in your composition more than cool colors do. The cool colors will recede, even sometimes if they're lighter, they'll recede. One example of it not being that way is aqua and red, which is huge, and you want to watch for that. You want to keep an eye out for that, because mixing those up can be a big deal, but it doesn't always have to be a big deal. It also depends on your lighting and your posing, but a lot of times people take these rules and they're like, oh, it's all or nothing, and that's not necessarily it. It has a lot to do with your studio and how it's set up. So I want you to make sure you're journaling, because this is how color relates to you, and these are just very easy things to follow to give you an idea of what you're looking for when you're looking at your compositions. So journaling will help you see what you're feeling as well. Which colors do you feel really bring out highlights? And which colors do you feel pull back the shadows? With your current lighting, do you feel you should accent the highlights or shadows more? So if your lighting's very bright, do you feel like you should pull back and do some more shadowy colored work? Or is your lighting not quite as bright? Is it more dark and moody and you should bring out highlights a little more? What's one image you feel you really created depth using color? Not just that you love these colors, but that you use the colors to enhance the image even better than what it would have been if you used the same colors but in different layers. And what is one image that you feel depth could have been enhanced better with the use of color? And what would you change around in that image and why? Is it a posing fabric choice that you could have moved around? Is it a bonnet choice you could have moved around? Or maybe your lighting's coming from